Welcome to the Daily Report. It's Tuesday, March 15th here in Korea. Local health authorities believe the Omicron wave will peak within the next few days before starting its decline from next Wednesday. We have more on this outlook later on in the program after a check on the global tallies with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start with the latest here on the local front.
Sure, Sunny. Korea is continuing to its streak of over 300,000 daily COVID-19 infections amid the Omicron wave, and more than 362,000 cases were tallied as of 12 a.m. this Tuesday, and that is a rise in domestic transmissions, but a slight dip in imported cases. And if we go over to our graph, we do see that this number is the second highest figure we had on Saturday, over 383,000. So this is the second highest figure we are seeing here in Korea. And with that, the average number of daily infections in the past 7 days stands at roughly 337,000. Now onto our map, we've got more than 102,000 cases in Gyeonggi-do province, almost 103,000, I should say. And also in most parts of the nation, there has been an increase compared to the day before, apart from Busan and Jeju-do Island. And if we go over now to the total number of cases accumulated here in the country, now standing at 7.2 million. And we also unfortunately have a record high in the number of fatalities that were posted in just a day, standing at 293. As for the number of patients in severe or critical condition, this number has also hit an all-time high, standing at 1,196. And now for the 8th consecutive day, this number has been at above 1,000. Onto our vaccination figures, there's been now 44.9 million and 44.4 million people in the nation that got their first or second shot or are considered fully vaccinated. And onto our booster shots, we've got 32.1 million. That's equivalent to 62.7% of the nation's population. Let's also take a look at the global figures. In the past 24 hours, as of noon Korea time, the world has reported a little over 1.6 million new COVID-19 infections with a little over 1,500 fatalities. But do notice that there's been a recent drop in this figure. Now going over to the countries with the highest accumulated infections in the world, we see that South Korea has become the 12th country in the world to surpass the 7 million mark, and South Korea, Vietnam, as well as Germany and the UK are still countries that are reporting 6-digit figures of daily infections. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, Korea's daily tally has picked up pace in the absence of the weekend factor. For more domestic COVID-19 coverage, Han Sung-woo is here in the studio with me. Good to see you again, Sung-woo.
Good afternoon.
Right, so tell me, does our daily tally on this Tuesday include all the positive rapid antigen test results as well?
Well, Sunny, I'd like to make it clear that although rapid antigen tests, positive ones, can now officially serve as proof of infection, only those who show symptoms after testing positive are included in the official daily tally from Tuesday onward for a month. That's according to KDCA Commissioner Chung Eun-kyung, who also said in a briefing yesterday that medical professionals who conduct the tests at local hospitals and clinics should be responsible for drawing a conclusion on whether to classify someone as being infected with COVID-19. That isn't to say, however, that the change in how the virus is screened didn't lead to more cases being detected. Yeonhap News reports that today's rise of 50,000 cases, more than 50,000 cases, compared to the day before, despite it being early in the week, likely has something to do with the new testing protocol. Officials predict the current surge in infections will hit its peak between the 15th and 22nd of March, reaching a daily average of as high as 372,000 before beginning to decline from next Wednesday. Recent data shows the Omicron variant, including the so-called stealth Omicron, accounts for over 99.9% of local transmissions.
Meanwhile, Sung-woo, given the latest turn of events amid Omicron here in the country, I understand a significant number of people in our public appear to be fatalistic now. Tell us about that.
I love that expression, and that is correct, Sunny. A survey carried out by a research team at the prestigious Seoul National University between February 25th, that is, and the 2nd of March showed that over 1/4, or a total of of a total of 1,000 respondents nationwide felt it's highly likely they would contract the virus. The team, led by Professor Yoo Sun of the Graduate School of Public Health, has been conducting similar surveys since January 2020, and the latest figure of 27.8% is the highest the figure has ever gone. But in stark contrast, the percentage of people who believe the consequences of getting infected are severe fell to its lowest ever at 47.9%. Meanwhile, those who viewed the risks posed by COVID-19 as controllable fell far short of those who viewed them as uncontrollable, about 37% and 63% respectively.
All right, Song-woo, thank you for now, but do stay for more talks.
Looking forward to it.
Right, meanwhile, authorities have shared guidelines about the treatment of COVID-19 patients at hospitals. And I have Swa back at the desk with details on that. Right, Swa?
Right, Sunny. And this is regarding hospitalized patients, people that have been hospitalized for other illnesses and then contract COVID-19. So starting tomorrow, so on Wednesday, these patients won't have to move to special negative pressure rooms unless their conditions are severe, but can be treated in regular hospital beds. This is to assign hospital beds in a more effective way according to symptoms, with officials citing the increase in the number of hospitalized patients that experience relatively lighter COVID-19 symptoms. So until the end of this month, the government will provide temporary incentives for these patients for a smooth transition of the system. Actually, some hospitals have already taken this measure, but from now on, it'll become a widely adopted standard. While medical capacity, according to officials, remains stable as of this Tuesday, the ICU operation rate nationwide has surpassed 65%. And depending on region, there are also places where more than 90% are being used.
I see. And so our treatment at home is also looking at a slight change, I hear. Tell us about that.
Yes, with the increasing number of COVID-19 patients, the number of those recovering at home is also accumulating fast. And that's why the government has made a revision to those subject to intensive care among those that are being treated at home. So also starting Wednesday, people with existing health conditions in their 50s will be categorized as regular patients, while until now they were subject to the same monitoring process as people aged 60 and above and immunocompromised patients or people with other specific illnesses. Authorities cited the close to 0% fatality rate of the Omicron variant for patients aged 50 and below, while more focus has to be put on managing patients at higher risk. As of 12 a.m. Tuesday, more than 16 million people are recovering at home, with over 246,000 of those being intensive care patients. That should be 1.6 million, I believe.
Right. So as you mentioned then, the gist right now is to allow for greater medical attention on those at high risk, whose numbers, I believe, are expected to rise.
Yes, Sunny. Actually, an official at the Health Ministry, senior official Son Young-nae, did say that 2 to 3 weeks past the Omicron week, we are expected to see an increase in the number of patients in severe or critical condition, as well as COVID-19 related deaths, because there is usually that interval that we have to consider after infections do rise. But the death rate, he stressed, remains low at below 0.1% in the recent 4 weeks, similar to the seasonal flu. And he added this.
The seasonal flu causes a minimum of around 2,500 deaths annually, and the figure can reach as high as 5,000 in some years. Pneumonia also kills tens of thousands of people every year. So in our view, there is a need for comparative analysis between deaths related to COVID-19 and those linked to other illnesses.
Right, so let's now include Song-woo in our talk. We're going to go into the international headlines with regard to COVID-19. I understand, Song-woo, that the UK is set to become the first country in the world to end all international travel restrictions.
That's correct, Sunny. In a landmark moment for passenger travel and the aviation sector, the UK's Travel Secretary Grant Shapps announced on Monday local time that the UK will remove its remaining international travel restrictions for all passengers ahead of the Easter holidays. From Friday 4 a.m., the passenger locator form for arrivals into the UK, as well as all COVID-19 screening tests for unvaccinated passengers, will be scrapped, with travelers no longer required to get tested pre-departure and on day 2 post-arrival. Officials have credited the success of Britain's vaccine rollout as the main reason behind the easing. But to ensure public health is protected, several contingency plans have been drawn up that will enable swift and proportionate action should the need arise to tackle the emergence of future COVID-19 variants entering the UK.
Right, but in contrast to the latest development over in the UK, Sung-woo, I understand Germany stands divided with regard to its social restrictions.
Yes, well, for starters, Berlin extended theirs actually. The capital's prevention measures actually were supposed to end on Sunday, but the city decided to stand pat until the end of March. After a period of gradual easing, Germany as a whole plans to lift most coronavirus restrictions on March 20th, although state governments will be allowed to require measures such as mask wearing and COVID-19 testing in so-called virus hotspots at their own discretion. But German Health Minister Karl Lauterbach has been calling on federal states to reevaluate, saying Friday that the situation is, quote, objectively worse than the public mood. This came before the Robert Koch Institute released its latest data on Monday, which showed the country's nationwide 7-day COVID-19 occurrence rate hit a new record of 1,543 per 100,000 inhabitants.
Meanwhile, so over in Thailand, do tell us about the Omicron subvariant there.
Right, we're talking about the BA.2 subvariant, which is suspected in at least 4 COVID-19 patients in Thailand. Reportedly, it was found in 1 foreigner and 3 Thais. A leading Thai health expert expressed concerns over this Omicron subvariant, which has been detected in close to 390 cases in Hong Kong and around 290 in the UK. There is little information on the severity or transmissibility of the strain, though, with experts saying there is no need for premature panicking. The BA.2 subvariant, however, has been cited as the reason for Thailand's latest rise in cases, as there are predictions it may soon become the dominant strain.
I see. Let's end on a promising note today then. So I hear Moderna is looking to make its vaccine available to children aged 5 and below.
Right. Just like its rival Pfizer, Moderna is seeking ways to receive approval for its vaccine to be used on the youngest population. According to the New York Times, the vaccine producer is set to send government officials initial data this week on the effectiveness of its vaccine for children aged under 5. The company is looking to use 2 doses of a quarter of the amount used for adults for children under 6. Now, Pfizer, meanwhile, was to seek approval for a 3-shot regimen for children under 5 next month, with 1/10 of a dose of those aged 12 and above. And meanwhile, Moderna also is expected to release data for its clinical trial of children aged 6 to 11 soon.
I see. All right. So thank you for the updates. Song-woo, thank you, and see you on Wednesday.
See you on Wednesday.
The Biden administration is concerned that China may seek to ease the brunt of global sanctions against Russia. In fact, concerns to this end were conveyed to a delegation of Chinese officials by their U.S. counterparts in Rome during marathon talks on Monday. Min Soo-kyun reports.
During an intense 7-hour meeting, Washington has expressed deep concerns over Beijing's alignment with Russia. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi on Monday to discuss a range of challenges, including Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. At their meeting in Rome, Sullivan warned the top Chinese official that any support for Russia, even helping it avert global sanctions, would be costly. Shortly after their talks ended, the U.S. State Department said that the National Security Advisor and their delegation were direct about those concerns.
We've made very clear that any country that would seek to attempt to bail Russia out of this economic, financial morass will be met with consequences. We will ensure that no country is able to get away with such a thing.
This comes after reports were made that Russia requested military and financial assistance from China to support its ongoing war in Ukraine. While Beijing has denied this, the U.S. informed allies in NATO and several Asian countries that China had signaled its willingness to provide assistance. On the use of chemical weapons, Washington reiterated there would be a severe price if Russia were to use them in Ukraine.
That would be a conversation that we would have with our partners around the world, but there's no question if Russia were to decide to use chemical weapons, there would be a severe reaction from the global community.
Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the prospects of a nuclear conflict is within the realm of possibility as Russia continues its unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. On Monday, heavy explosions were heard in and around the capital Kyiv, with the shelling of a residential building that killed at least one and injured several more. Also on the same day, a convoy of 160 cars was allowed to escape the besieged port city Mariupol, home to the worst humanitarian crisis of the conflict. It's the first time a humanitarian corridor was used to let civilians flee the city amid horrifying conditions. So far, more than 600 fatalities have been confirmed in the last 3 weeks, and almost 3 million refugees have fled for neighboring countries since the start of the invasion. Min Suk-yeol, Arirang News.
On the local political front, the lineup of the incoming administration's transition team is taking visible shape. Our Kim Yeon-seung has some of their names and their tasks.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol is one step closer to completing his transition team. Yoon spokesperson Kim Eun-hae announced in a briefing on Tuesday morning the names that will lead its 3 divisions. For the head of its Economy First Division, Yoon called in Choi Sang-mo, who was the Vice Minister of Economy and Finance under the Park Geun-hye administration. As an expert in macroeconomics and financial economics, Choi will work alongside President-elect Yoon and try to crack some of Yoon Suk-yeol's top pledges, providing COVID-19 relief funds and reforming pensions. For the Diplomacy and Security Division, former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Kim Sung-han was named. Kim is an expert in international politics with 3 decades of experience. He helped facilitate Yoon's call with U.S. President Biden last week and has been appointed to strengthen the Korea-U.S. alliance and work on a comprehensive strategic partnership with Washington. For political, judicial, and administrative affairs, former Assemblyman Lee Yong-ho has been appointed as secretary. According to spokesperson Kim Eun-hae, Lee comes from a journalism background and has proven his political caliber as a chief policymaker for the People's Party. She added that Lee will help restore justice and common sense. Meanwhile, Yoon is scheduled to meet with President Moon Jae-in at the Blue House on Wednesday. It's the first time they're meeting face-to-face since the election. Yoon's spokesperson said on Tuesday that it will be a very private and low-stakes event with no attendants present. She added that Yoon plans to bring up pardoning former President Lee Myung-bak, who is currently serving a 17-year sentence. Kim Yeon-seung, Arirang News.
In other news, it's been precisely a decade since the launch of Korea's free trade deal with the U.S. And to mark the occasion, our Kim Sung-min walks us through the bilateral gains of the 10-year timeframe.
A win-win deal could be how to describe the free trade agreement between South Korea and the U.S., which marks its 10th anniversary on Tuesday. Since the agreement took effect on March 15, 2012, the two sides have become key trading partners. Latest data shows the trade volume between Seoul and Washington soared over 66% to $169.1 billion last year from around $100 billion in 2011. Both sides benefited heavily from the deal. South Korea's trade surplus with the U.S. almost doubled to $22.7 billion in 2021 from $11.6 billion before the FTA. The trade balance has stayed in the black for the past 10 years. Cars, auto parts, semiconductors, computers, and petroleum products largely drove the surge, with South Korea's exports to the U.S. reaching almost $96 billion in 2021. For the U.S., the deal attracted almost 4 times more investment from Korea, with the accumulated investment over the past 10 years amounting to $113 billion. The U.S. is the top destination of South Korea's foreign direct investment, accounting for 25% of the total. The most notable investments made recently by South Korea include key strategic sectors like batteries, semiconductors, and electric vehicles. Experts say the investment could benefit both countries.
For example, the battery industry is extremely competitive. South Korean firms can expand their market share more easily compared to their rivals by investing in the U.S. market jointly with the local firms. Semiconductors, too. Korean firms can benefit from U.S. technology by expanding their investment in the U.S. market, enjoying a win-win effect.
And the overall benefit of the deal is being felt by Korean companies, too. Out of 150 Korean importers and exporters to the U.S., over 97% said the deal had a positive impact, mainly by helping them gain price competitiveness through the removal of tariffs. Some said the deal strengthened cooperative research and development between the two countries. While Seoul and Washington have come a long way, they still have more to achieve through the FTA.
There could be more discussion between the two on newly emerging trade issues regarding the transition to the digital economy and carbon neutrality to upgrade the current form of FTA.
The expert added that the continuous strengthening of the trade ties between the countries will also help them weather global uncertainties amid the U.S.-China rivalry. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The UK Supreme Court on Monday denied WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's appeal against moves to extradite him to the US, where he could face life in prison. According to a Supreme Court spokesperson, the application was refused because it did not raise an arguable point of law. A British district court judge had initially rejected extradition to the U.S. on the grounds that Assange was likely to kill himself if sent to U.S. prison and held under harsh conditions. The UK's High Court later overturned the lower court's decision, saying the U.S. had guaranteed that Assange would be treated humanely. The case is now expected to be formally sent to the UK's Home Secretary for approval, after which Assange can attempt to challenge the decision by judicial review. The U.S. wants to put the 50-year-old on trial in connection to the publication of 500,000 secret military files he leaked related to U.S.-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Germany is set to purchase dozens of F-35 fighter jets built by Lockheed Martin to replace its aging Tornado aircraft. According to the German Defense Ministry, Berlin is aiming to buy up to 35 of these stealth jets. Currently, the Tornado is the only German jet capable of carrying U.S. nuclear bombs stored in Germany. However, with the jet being in use since the 1980s, Berlin is planning to phase it out between 2025 and 2030. Pundits also say the decision could upset France, as the deal could undermine the development of a joint Franco-German fighter jet that's supposed to be ready after 2040. Members of the British royal family, as well as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, attended the annual Commonwealth Day service at the Westminster Abbey on Monday. However, one key figure was missing from the event, Queen Elizabeth II herself. While the palace gave no reason for the Queen's absence from Monday's event, she has been recovering from COVID-19. The 95-year-old reportedly expressed her regret for not being able to attend the annual event. Jeff Bezos' astro-tourism company Blue Origin is scheduled to take to the skies next week, and aboard as an honorary guest will be Saturday Night Live star Pete Davidson. The 28-year-old comedian will be joined by 5 paying customers, taking part in the 4th flight to space of the fledgling space tourism industry. The 10-minute flight will lift off from Texas on March 23rd. Known as the King of Staten Island, Davidson is the latest celebrity to take a trip to the edge of space, following Star Trek star William Shatner. 이승재, Arirang News.
Places in Asia that have witnessed their Omicron peak are taking tentative steps into a new chapter in their confrontation with COVID-19. For more, I have Dr. Dale Fisher at the National University Hospital in Singapore. Dr. Fisher, it's a pleasure to have you on.
It's good to be back, Sunny.
Right, I hear Singapore has moved beyond its Omicron peak and that the wave is now subsiding, albeit slowly, according to health authorities there. Let's start with a few words, Dr. Fisher, on the COVID-19 situation over there in Singapore.
Well, we could go back a little bit, and it was really last August that we established that we had very high vaccination rates, and we started during Delta to actually be starting to ease restrictions, and that was when we learned that even a small percentage of the unvaccinated population was still a very large number of people. So we had quite a surge at that time, and quite a few severe disease and deaths, particularly in that small number of unvaccinated people. Now, we've advanced a lot. We know we've got Omicron, and that's actually infected a lot of people. And but now we're in the phase where the hospitals are quite comfortable. There's only, I think, 30-something people in intensive care in the country. But we've still maintained a lot of our restrictions, particularly with regards travel, testing, mask wearing, congregating in groups. So it's about developing the confidence to remove some of those things. Do we have that confidence, especially when we're still having like 10,000 cases a day?
Right. Dr. Fisher, you touched upon the importance of vaccination. Having said that, then, what are your thoughts on the need for booster shots for those aged 12 to 17, which have recently been recommended by authorities there in Singapore, as well as here in Korea?
Look, I think the biggest advantage in boosters is really in stopping severe disease. I really don't think we see a great benefit in stopping transmission with these vaccines. And obviously the biggest benefit, since we're focusing on severe disease, is in the vulnerable. So children are obviously much less at risk than senior people and those that are immune compromised, but nonetheless children can still get very sick. So, you know, in a vaccine that's really quite safe, I can see why we're moving towards boosters slowly in those children above 5.
Right. And for children aged 5 to 11 here in the country, Dr. Fisher, they will be receiving their COVID-19 vaccination starting at the end of this month. Do you suppose this broader public protection effort will serve to perhaps facilitate our transition into an endemic phase of COVID-19?
Well, it's a game changer. If you go back to the pre-vaccination days, then we had to have all these blunt community level interventions, all the mask wearing and all the way through to a complete lockdown and don't leave your home in some countries. The vaccine has turned it into a mild disease. Singapore, of all our tens of thousands of cases over the last months, or hundreds of thousands probably, 99.7% are mild or asymptomatic. So we're just, it's quite unlucky if you're vaccinated and you get severe disease. It's still, severe disease is still very much the domain of the unvaccinated.
Right. And Dr. Fisher, keeping in mind what you just said, do you see COVID-19 vaccination becoming an annual affair then, like, for example, the seasonal flu vaccine?
Well, the problem is we don't have a good test. We're basing this information on antibody levels, and everybody knows that the T cell response, which doesn't produce the antibodies, has still got good memory and good potential to fight COVID. So we are extrapolating. I think it's quite likely that people are going to feel more comfortable with boosters, and also as the virus mutates, the vaccine might have to modify to adjust to those mutations. So I think it's quite likely repeated vaccinations are going to be needed. But again, the emphasis has to be on the most vulnerable, and maybe vaccinating, all our children every year won't be so important. But as with flu, vaccinating our over 65s, for instance, might be important.
Right. Meanwhile, starting on this Tuesday over in Singapore, Dr. Fisher, is the implementation of streamlined COVID-19 prevention guidelines. Could you tell us a bit about them and your thoughts?
Well, they're trying to simplify things, as you know, we've had 2 or 3 years of just adding more, and there's a few contradictions in the rules where you can. For instance, you can't mix with your colleagues socially in the workplace, but you can outside of the workplace. So obviously, we don't want to get a whole lot of essential workers sick at the same time. But things like this are what we're just trying to streamline. There's been no massive changes. There's still 2 schools of thought on that we could be reducing a lot more of the blunt restrictions as we move towards endemicity. But yeah, they're not doing that yet. This is just about more of a tidy up, I think.
Right. And finally, I understand this may be a tough question, but Dr. Fisher, do you believe this Omicron wave will be the final challenge posed by COVID-19, or do you foresee the emergence perhaps of new variants that may serve to further disrupt our daily activities?
So I think, Sunny, that COVID resilience is all about surveillance, watching how the virus evolves, and when things are going well, then I think we should be allowed to step down to some degree our mask wearing and our limitations of group sizes. But by the same token, we need to be ready as a community, and the health authorities and communities all over the world need to establish, maintain, or re-establish the trust, the faith in the system, so that if we need to reintroduce measures, and it might be everyone turn your phone apps on, we're going to have to start scanning QR codes again, and we will need to have that community level response for future variants, for whole new viruses altogether. But I think this engagement with communities is really critical, so that people understand where we are, and if there's a change, then hey, we know the drill. Let's get back in and fight it as a community. So I think that's where we should be looking now, is how to become resilient, which may mean at times a broad community response to something new.
Right, a valid point right there. All right, Dr. Fisher, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Among the many tasks to be tackled by the incoming Yoon administration are those related to the economy amid the prolonged pandemic and geopolitical risks. For more, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Julian University. Professor Song, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
I also have Professor Kim Se-wan from Ewha Women's University. It's good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Song, inflation here in the country and elsewhere across the world amid the pandemic has been aggravated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Having said that, what are your prospects with regard to global inflation?
Yeah, according to the report and data, then the U.S. economy has experienced a very large surge, very rapid surge of the inflation. But most of the sophisticated investors and some experts, academicians, believe that is relatively transitory. Over the coming years, the inflation pressure will be subsided over time, but though moderately. But however, the most uncertainty is derived from the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Actually, those wars are regarded as a civil war among the Russians in Eastern European countries. But the problem is recently we have seen that the U.S. government has warned against the Chinese government not to help the Russia. So it means that the conflict may be escalated and extended to some kind of a new Cold War. If that happens, that is realized, that it would be a most serious threat and obstacle to overcome of the coming years for the Korean economy in the phase of the recovery. And so that is also a very important issue, how to deal with that issue. That is sometimes beyond the control of the Korean government right now. So that is an obstacle, I think.
Hopefully it will not escalate to that point. Professor Kim, meanwhile, as part of efforts to rein in inflation, Korea's central bank became the first major central bank in Asia to hike its benchmark interest rate late last year amid the onset of the pandemic. Do you suppose the incoming Yoon administration will perhaps adopt a similar monetary policy direction?
As of now, the market's expectation is that Bank of Korea would raise the key interest rate 3 times by 0.25% for each until the end of the year. So then the Bank of Korea's key interest rate will be 2% from today's 1.25%. But the economic situation is getting more complicated due to the war in Ukraine, which provides more serious shock to global energy market and global inflation. The domestic inflation exceed 3% level over 5 straight months from last October. And that became one of the strongest inflation pressure in 2 decades. Since the main job of the central bank is a fighter against inflation, the new chairman of Bank of Korea will try to raise the interest rate further to stabilize the inflation. However, if the economic situation, like the employment and economic recovery, gets weaker, there is a possibility that central banks can speed down the interest rate hike schedule.
Right. And Professor Song, a key pledge by President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol during his campaign was comprehensive compensation for small businesses in light of the hardships incurred because of COVID-19 related restrictions. Do tell us a bit more about this presidential pledge.
Yeah, because of the supply disruption and the shortage of the laborers, that has devastating negative impact on some small business people. So always the people with the income level of the lower scale always suffered most from some disruption and some economic recession. So it is necessary to help them to recover and overcome these obstacle ordeals. And because this is a transitory, and as Professor Kim has mentioned, the energy price is soaring, but recently I have seen that the future price of the Western Texas Intermediate and Brent oil has been declined over the few days ago. And so that tells us that because the price surge of the energy price is a kind of price gouging, so which means that they have earned a profit as much as possible while the oil is producing and is demanding. But otherwise, in the future, that is the demand for the oil is necessarily declining over time. So to that regard, we can say that the energy price inflation pressure will be removed in the upcoming years. So, but for the time being, it needs help, those small business people to overcome and this ordeal. That is necessary step for the President-elect Yoon to do for the coming years.
Right. And Professor Kim, President-elect Yoon has spoken against issuing government bonds, claiming that funds to help small businesses can be raised by restructuring this year's budget. How feasible is this claim?
It is said that to implement the new president campaign pledges, it cost about 250 trillion won in next 5 years. To finance these pledges, restructuring current budget is not easy job because every single one in the budget has its name tag, which is related to economic interest to a certain group of people outside. So I think in the end, new president should be selling the bonds to finance his own campaign pledge projects. But there is one way to avoid this increasing debt or selling the bonds. The one possibility is if tax revenues for this year exceed government's regular budget over 608 trillion won, like that of last year's 27 trillion won tax revenue surplus, the new government can avoid issuing the bonds or increasing the government debt.
Right, I see. And Professor Song, before we delve any further, actually, what can you tell us about Korea's fiscal health?
I think that Korea's fiscal debt actually against the GDP level is one of the lowest among the more advanced countries. So we have really larger room for to make use of the fiscal policy rather than some monetary policy such as interest rate hike or other some control or the quantitative easing. But however, recently we have seen that whether the Korean economy the unemployment rate has reached the full employment rate or not, I'm not sure about that. I'm not convinced at all that Korea economy has reached the full employment rate, because once we reach the full employment rate, the wage increase will be directly reflected in the inflation rate. So that is what's happening right now in the U.S. So according to the data, U.S. has experienced some, they underestimate the inflation threat in the last fourth decades of 2021. So that's why they have experienced such a high interest inflation rate, such as 7.9 percentage point. But still, that inflation will be declining moderately, and that is what the academicians and other experts expect. Well, for the Korean economy, even though the unemployment rate has been reported to be 4% or hovering 4% or something, but still, I'm not sure whether the Korean people who has experienced some high level of the wage and then now they are returning to with the job, but they realize that now they know that how terrible the past job experience was because of they have suffered so much from the lower real wage and the actually declining real wage for the past several decades. So that is the issue to overcome. And to that regard, as long as we have room for fiscal policy, and we must have maintained, anytime we make use of the fiscal policy, rather than increasing the interest rate too fast or too much, because rising interest rate, clearly it helps remove the inflation threat pressure, but however, it could damage the demand. It could reduce the demand, so as a result, then the economy is in declining. So that is so we need some balanced attitude and a balanced perspective on the upcoming inflation threat.
Right, and we have more room for fiscal policies then.
Right.
Professor Kim, another task facing the incoming administration is that related to the real estate market and related taxation. What has been shared thus far?
In his presidential election campaign, the president-elect pointed out several times that one of the most disturbing factors in the real estate market is fast increasing property tax in the last 5 years. So new government's real estate market policies on lessening the property tax burden. The bottom line is, I think, freezing current property tax at 2020 level. At the same time, new government will try to provide more apartments in major metro areas in Seoul, Incheon, Daejeon, Gwangju, and Daegu. So it means that government will try to stabilize the real estate market through providing more apartment, not by trying to control the demand size of the apartment.
Right. Right. And staying with the same topic, Professor, what perhaps then are some of the potential risks of slashing property taxes to levels seen in the year 2020 and perhaps relaxing relevant regulations?
It is up to the diagnosis about the current economic situation in Korea. As I mentioned earlier, if the Korean economy needs to grow and we have not reached yet the full employment rate, then we can say that some transitory or temporary tax cut and the tax exemption credit could be of help to the people who have suffered from the coronavirus pandemic and this kind of shortage of the supply in the past several months. And so to that regard, a temporary tax cut would be help, but that should not be extended for further at all, and it should not be limited to the benefit of some rich people. So that is my concern, and so to that regard, as long as the newly elected President-elect Mr. Yoon has decided to supply the real estate further, so that could help remove some housing price expectation that has been prevalent among the people during the Moon government, President Moon's government. So that could be relieved and removed. So that would help to stabilize the housing price. But I don't think the housing price bubble will burst, and then we have. I don't think we are going to experience the downward spiral of housing price.
Right. And Professor Kim, also during his campaign rallies, President-elect Yoon pledged to support economic growth led by the private sector rather than one that is led by the state. What changes can we expect?
Promoting economic activities through deregulation is the main theme of the new government. So in the long run, it is a great news to both of the employers and employees, because employers will find more business opportunities, and at the same time, the employees, workers, will find more job opportunities. Mr. Yoon particularly emphasized deregulation in the fields of IT and of course, industrial revolution-related industries like 3D printers and big data and so on. So there will be big expansion of businesses in IT-related industries. But get back to the real economy, there are actually huge conflicts between companies, workers, and governments. So in this respect, I think strong leadership is needed to compromise different economic interests among these economic players.
Right. And moving forward, Professor Song, what changes are likely within the labor market under the new administration? Mr. Yoon has spoken about the need for flexibility with regard to working hours.
Right. I believe that in Korean labor market, people has experienced a surge of the minimum wage for the past 5 years. And then it is very difficult to go back to when the minimum wage is very low. The reason is because in the U.S. experience, then during the outbreak of the coronavirus, and the U.S. has suffered from the shortage of the labor supply. And then the people realized that they do not want to go back what they used to earn. So that is described as a great resignation era under the coronavirus pandemics. So the same would be the case to Korean labor market also. So the issue is whether the Korean economy has reached the full employment rate, and the economic growth rate is very strong right now. So that is a question about that. So if that is we are not convinced yet the Korean economy is on the path to full recovery and to the past track, then we should be very careful in increase of the interest rate and adjustment of minimum wage rate because that could cause some kind of resignation, and the people do not want to go back what they used to work. So it means that the shortage of the labor supply could be a burden to the recovery of the Korean economy.
Right, I see. And Professor Kim, aside from what we've covered thus far, is there another perhaps challenge on the economic front that you believe needs to be well addressed by the incoming administration?
Well, I think everyone has different hopes and expectations on the new government. Basically, however, I think the economy after the COVID pandemic will be totally different from that of the before the pandemic. So new economy provides both of challenges and opportunities together. But if new government does not manage these new and huge changes appropriately, it can hurt really the economic growth potential of the Korean economy. So even though it takes long and it is painful, the new government should be bolster the economic growth potential through improving birth rate problem and unfair income distribution problem, and improving workers' productivity.
Right. And Professor Song, what would you care to highlight as being in need of better attention by the new administration?
The new government, and particularly the new chairman of the Bank of Korea, should be very cautious in determination of the interest rate, because it could cause some damage on the demand. And so, because we know that the current problem is due to some supply disruption, then we have to deal with supply issue, not the demand issue. So increasing interest rate, that is a very indirectly and very good way to control the inflation, but not indirectly, because it could have least side effect. But however, we must be careful about not to remove the punch bowl too early to reduce and end up with reducing the demand and consumption, and then create an obstacle for the recovery of the economy. That's my opinion.
Right, you would support then cautious efforts.
Right.
All right, Professor Song, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Professor Kim, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Join us then. Thank you for now.